am live according to the YouTubery. Happy Friday. Sorry it's a bit of a late stream, but that's just how things go. You will see on screen something that is not quite ready for prime time, but if I've been quiet recently, it's because I've been working on this. It's the first and what I hope is a bunch of zines. This is the cover that I put together. No great shakes, but it tells a story. I'm just going to flip through this. It's a really quick flip through. I'll probably do something more formal, maybe not after it comes out. I guess we'll see. But I just thought, since I've been working on it, why not show it a bit? So this has a few things in it. It's actually not in order. This will be where, and it's not totally completed, because this will be where the table of contents and little blobby blobs will be. This is a D20 kind of based thing. I use some D6. It's a mix of D6 and D20, but this specifically is to be kind of generic, so that you can use it with anything. I do come up with a couple of terms myself, because just I want to be, this is probably unnecessary, but my feeling was that rather than get, hey, Constitution, and you're like, well, but this game doesn't use Constitution, whatever. I mean, I know people could figure it out, but I thought, I just want to be generic. So I came up with a couple of generic things. Basically, instead of hit points, I say health. And instead of saying Constitution or something, I say vigor. And then I have a couple of things like you can test vigor, you can lose vigor, and you regain vigor. And this can be Constitution or whatever you want. So also the thing is, what I like about this is that, so I put in this one spot, hey, if you're testing vigor, you can decide as the GM what that means in your specific system. Even in BX, you might have different ones. Some people, for an endurance type thing, might want to use roll under Constitution. Other people might want to have save versus death, let's say. I kind of like saves for that because they scale with your level, whereas Con doesn't. But you can do what you want. In this case, I can just say test vigor, and then when you decide how you want to handle that, I don't have to write in a bunch of places, different things. I can just say, hey, you know what? Test vigor. And if in your system or just in the way you play, that's roll under Con. Or you want to say D20 plus class is 20 or something, whatever. You could do that. I don't have to write it a bunch of times. And so that's that part. So that's kind of a little bit of a forward. It's just really to get those things out of the way. I did this little piece here because I use this in the book. I call it extending advantage, disadvantage. It's basically having multiples. So, I in some places I say, hey, add an advantage. If you have this, add an advantage. I don't want them to either, I don't want them to say cancel each other out, or to just, I don't want it to be flat. Like, well, there's just one advantage. Like, oh, you can have multiple, and then you can do things with the multiple. If you end up with, multiple successes, let's say on a roll. So I just kind of break that down here. Then I went to these character perks just for fun. You would roll these as you're creating your character. They're pretty situational, and some of them are goofy. Iron Stomach increases your save versus poisons, though. And now I'm thinking of this. Do I need to make a whole bunch of things for save versus poison? I'll just leave it alone. Maybe I'll just say, hey, bonus versus poisons. And these things in brackets is kind of this thing I'm doing where I'm when you see these things, and I do have a note here that explains it, but these are, in a sense, your tiers of play. So that if you have, so basically first, fourth, and eighth. So first level, your ghoul sense, your ghoul nosed, you can detect undead. First to third level, you'll be 60 feet. Fourth to seventh level, 90 feet. 8 or more, 120 feet. So that basically these things scale, which I appreciate. So you go up levels. Oh, hey, now this scales up a little bit. But there's a bunch of them, and they're, like I said, they're pretty situational. Some of them are kind of goofy, and then here's my notes on that. Now, kind of the meat of this is some wilderness survival stuff. It's kind of a refinement, a little bit of a simplification on stuff I've done in the past. I will probably fold some of this into some of that when I update them. But basically, I give areas and distances, time. I'm kind of really boiling down conditions of difficulty. I do talk. This is some of the stuff I've pulled from the One Ring, which I've been playing in recently, and I like some of the things I do. And I think the stream I did last week, I talked about how I appreciated fatigue and how fatigue worked in the game. So I kind of work some of that in there. I'm also working in, one of the things I like is that when you're in the, what do they call it? The journey phase in the One Ring, whoever's the they don't call it the navigator, but whoever's the leading, the guiding the expedition, guiding the travel, will roll a die. And the better they roll, the further you travel before something bad happens. And I kind of like that. I think that's cool. I think that's a way of, one, it takes something that's generally a GM facing thing, which is, that getting lost kind of roll. Now it flips it to the player side. And I think it means then that they can try to do things. Okay, so we're trying to be really, we were trying to avoid encounters. We're doing all the stuff. Great, they can make that roll. You can add whatever you want to add, blah, 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 blah. And now you can use that result to say, okay, so now instead of me rolling in the next hex, or say the next turn for an encounter, now you've bought yourself 2 turns before I'm going to make the roll. Not to say that something's going to happen on turn 3, but I'm going to make that roll. So it's taking something that's making it a little bit variable, but it'll be something that you can incorporate so that you're all playing at the table. It's not just you behind the screen, it's the party and their decisions factoring into how they're traveling. And I broke it down in a couple ways. So one is for getting lost. One is for basically running into some kind of obstacle, and I don't have anything written about obstacles in here. This is one of the challenges of this kind of thing is I'm kind of bumping up against the size limits I want for this, and I just run out. There's always this temptation to go, oh man, just one more page. Oh, one more page, I can do obstacles. At some point, I got to go. You know what? I got to stop. Otherwise, this thing will be 100 pages long. So I don't have anything here about what an obstacle is. I figure folks can make it up, but essentially it's a difficulty. Maybe I can put a note in there. I don't really have room, but there's somewhere I can squeeze in a note about, hey, just if you want to make it kind of an exhaustion tax, like you're just getting more. That's a way you could do it. Whatever. If you can't come up with an obstacle, it seems like it's not adding. Whatever. It's difficult to do. And then so I guess I didn't really go through the roll. So the guide is for that finding your bearings. So how they're rolling to see how long that you can go before, how many hexes you can travel before you might get lost. The scout, they're rolling to see how many turns before you might run into some kind of obstacle that you have to deal with. Because they're kind of helping you. The guide is kind of setting we must go north. And the scout is the one that's moving around out and about, kind of figuring out, okay, how can we get around stuff. The guard is obviously keeping watch. So if you do roll for an encounter, how far away that encounter is, the guard's going to determine. And I just use close, far, distant here. Obviously, you don't want close. That's basically your ambush range, and far and distant. I think they make sense. You could probably convert them into numbers, but I haven't yet. And then supply is how well you're doing with meals. So if it's basically how many per person, and I'm including mounts for this, mounts and animals in terms of food count as people. So how much supply are you rolling through with for what you've got? So this thing is here just making them player facing, and I kind of just roll through that here. I just kind of give just some short and quick things about just everything is basically a half page or a page pretty much. Yeah, and these are all half letter pages. So you have activities, and I don't go through really a lot of specific. Well, I do go through some specific ones, but basically just how are you rolling from them? What does seasons, time of day, blah blah blah. Exhaustion, which I went through in the other stream. Okay, what do you do with that fatigue? How do you handle fatigue? Some rules for traveling on different paths, kind of things: off trail, on track, or on road. Obviously, the on road's better than on track, which is better than on trail, which is better than off trail. And then I have a bit about what mounts do, and then also about wayfinding when you're trying to find paths, and I have some tables you can roll on for that, and some tables for the referees to roll for dangers. I've got some hunting and foraging stuff for the modifiers to rolls, what happens when you find some stuff. You got to process game, which is kind of a nice touch. This is a pretty grounded, kind of a little bit gritty sort of wilderness rules. So you down this deer, great. Now you have to spend time actually processing it to turn it into things. So that just takes time. And I've mentioned this before, but one of the things that I kind of like is where things take time, where you just can't run through it. Oh, yeah, we're hunting, we got deer, whatever. It's okay, no, you got to take the time to do it. It means you have to be thoughtful in your approach. So you might want to do a bunch of hunting, that's great, but you have to have somewhere to do that work. If you've set up a really good campsite that you have that you're going to be at several days, then yeah, the hunting and everything, that makes it really easy because you just bring it back to camp and do it. If you're trying to do everything on the run, that makes it a lot more difficult. So just adding decisions that hopefully are meaningful, because time being important, trying to get places before other people get places potentially, or before whatever. So, you want to save time. So this is just, but there, you got some rules. These are all very simple rules. I'm not going to go through them all, at least not now, but it's just really simple. And this is one of the things I'm trying to do is give you some places to find, but I have some rules for searching for things, basically like places. So landmarks, locales, or secrets, and then just some things about what those might look like. I have rules for camping, different kinds of camps. When you're looking for camps, you want to spend time looking for a camp, because looking for a good camp will help you. Getting a cruddy campsite is going to hinder your ability to rest and recover, which I have on the opposite page. And resting and recovering is obviously if you're hurt, but also for that fatigue, that exhaustion you might be piling up. You need to be able to rest. I have some rules here for generating some sicknesses. Either an infestation, an illness, or a disease. Some of them require just kind of regular treatments. Others require a magic type treatment. So I have that. And then I have some rules about basically how serious the infestation, illness, or disease is and kind of what that means. I have a whole bunch of tables for creating herbs. I posted a simple version of this on my forums in a couple places last week, I think. Here is the more completed one. So we've got the type. And I'm using herb very loosely. So, tree could be a tree, shrub, flower, a grass, a fungus, or a mold or lichen, all in this case counting as an herb. What habitat is it found in? How rare is it? What component do you use? How do you prepare it? What does it target? Is it good? Is it helpful? Is it harmful? How rare is it? How strong is it? And then you've got a whole bunch of 3d6, or sorry, not 3d6, 2d6, 3-column spark table, essentially, for coming up for names. I have one for beasts, so kind of a similar thing where you got a rarity, how many hit dice, how big they are, what type they are. This is kind of species-ish. Are they? Yeah. So I have kind of normal ones, sort of unusual ones. Though some of the unusual ones, reptile, amphibian. I just kind of ran out. I'm doing all D6 stuff, so I kind of run on tables. But anyway, you can kind of bounce up the tables, so you get some really weird kind of Cthulhian stuff like shapeless colors or insane geometry, things like that. And you can also roll and combine a bunch of stuff also to work if they have any kind of powers, what they are. And then again, another 3-column D66 table for rolling for names. And then finally, for generating some sites, which gives you types, conditions, ages, locations, alignments, atmospheres, appearance. How did they fall? What is I guess downfall? I guess maybe I should change that. Because really, I mean, like, these sites are probably, I guess, they're adventure sites. So they're not, this is not like a settlement. This is more like a weird thing. So like, what happened to it? Decayed or declined? There's mayhem or murder or some kind of destiny. Is there some kind of energy about it? How prominent is it? What's the danger kind of level? What's the significance of it? A historically significant place would be a place that's kind of like, it's part of the story of the land. So that's kind of interesting. Oh, what happened to, what happened to the Sodom and Gomorrah? Oh, okay, that's what happened. Oh, yeah, and okay, great. But it's not, that's kind of, it's like a lore, maybe would be that. And then political, it might have some kind of political importance. Obviously, you'd have to come up with it yourself. Or ritual, like maybe it's somewhere that you come to do something, to do a thing. Like something magic like, and that's a good spot. And then kind of who's occupying it now? Is there anything there? And then also this one I'm kind of happy with, this sort of weather. So one of the problems I've found, I've talked about this a while back, but one of the problems I found with the hex flower system is if you're using a D6, and you can use other die sizes, obviously, but I like the D6 because there's 6 faces. The problem is if you have a face, something in the middle, how do you get to the middle? One of the things I realized is you could roll 2D6, and then what I decided was, so in a 2D6, there is a 16 point whatever % chance that you're going to get, any particular number, right? A 1 in 6 chance. there's also a 1 in 6 chance that you'll get some kind of matching, that you'll get 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5. So what I thought of is, well, what if you used a d6 to go around the edges, but if you roll 2 dice and look at the second die and see if it matches, then you stay where you are. So that kind of solves for me that problem that I was feeling about what to do rolling on a hex flower kind of system if you're using d6s. So that's pretty clever. But then I also decided, well, what if you have, in this case, like I rolled a 4 and a 5. So what you could do is I decided to have like, okay, you could actually use the line that's between them. Like you could go like this, pew, like that. So here, if you're Sunny and you roll a 4 and a 5, you could go down that line, whoop, and then go right to a rainstorm or, precipitation, whatever. I'm not using all, you're going to have to interpret these for different seasons. So obviously in the winter, this might be freezing rain or snow, whatever. I'm not getting into all the seasonal stuff. So I thought that was a neat way to add some more variation. Also just use, once you have those 2 dice, and then if it's the difference is larger than 2, or I think I have more than 3, then I could use 2, but I think I have 3 in there right now. If it's more than 3, then that affects how far you move, how far it pushes. So if they match, you stay. If the difference is only 1, you go along the line. And then if the difference is more than that, then it kind of affects how far you push. So I just thought it was I guess I'll pat myself on the back. I don't know. You guys can tell me what you think. I thought it was a clever way to kind of get that hex flowery sort of navigation with just 2 dice and getting all the results and not having to do like not the middles and stuff. So anyway, I was pretty happy with that. And I think that's it. And yeah, that's it. I'm not quite done with the back cover page. I just wanted to share it real quick and just let you guys know, since, hey, I've been kind of a little bit quiet. So why? Because I've been trying to kick this thing out and get it done. Yeah, that is that. That is that. So now I can eliminate this. Ooh, look at that lovely wallpaper. And then we can go to the so-called roots of the hobby over at the OSR subreddit and see what's going on. This is some Jamaica for the working man. All right. What have we got? I'm on new. I'm going to give it a refresh. All right, martial classes for Shadow Dark. Great. Looking for game OSE. Good luck. Hex maps. Love them or hate them. Let's see. I'm vaguely curious. Okay, Mesquite Tree says they like the idea but haven't actually run them. Eric Vulgaris says they're pretty good, but that they're overused. Most tables actually prefer single point crawl maps, but when you're actually exploring, they're fun. Yeah, I mean, so, there's some interesting stuff with the point crawls. Actually, one of the things I've been meaning to maybe make a video on. So I was listening to one of the, the Between Two Karens podcast, and Yohai was kind of chastising just generally about people kind of misunderstanding point crawls, in that a point crawl does not mean you're stuck on only paths. That's how I tend to look at it. That's just, I will mea culpa on the point crawl, pretty much mean on the paths. And he points out that games, and I think he's more or less talking about Cairn 2nd edition, but I think maybe other games too, have rules for going off path. And I think that's totally fair. And I don't disagree with that. I do think most people, like I said, myself included, think of point crawls as being just on the paths and don't necessarily think about the off-path stuff that he says is you can do in things like Cairn. I think the issue, though, and this is where I'll push back just slightly on that, is that when you present something with the paths marked out and the map doesn't necessarily, it's just hard to say because it's not like the maps don't say you can go out the path, but if everything is I guess I'll say if the presentation and the rules seem to be pushing you on the paths, then you're probably less likely to engage with the stuff that says, oh, by the way, you can go off path. And I think it's very easy to get caught up in an adventure on a rule set, and even if the rules, even if if there's a mechanic in the rule set for going off path, I think it's very easy, and certainly this has happened to me in reading stuff, to just naturally think, okay, the paths are the thing, because nobody has mentioned Insane Adventure that you can go off path. Maybe it is in Cairn 2E somewhere, but if I don't recall it, it's not on top of mind. But the paths are all explained and listed out, right? It's just natural to me if I'm looking at something that just shows me that has detail about the paths and then no detail or anything about the not on the paths, that I'm going to think it's kind of, well, you're meant to go on the paths kind of thing. Does that make sense? And I think with a hex map, I don't think you tend to have that problem because the hexes, at least the way I look at them, and I don't know if somebody who doesn't know anything about games looks at a hex map. I don't know if they really see it or not. But to me, hex maps invite the connections between the hexes, which gives you a more broad thing than just the paths. And you can overlay paths on the hex crawl. And I think that often they shouldn't be too divergent. I think have both. I mean, what roads, rivers, all these kind of paths you put on your hex map, they're point crawls. So hex maps explicitly, if there are any kind of roads or any sort of trails on there, have point crawls overlaid on top of them. And that's, to me, that's the best. You don't need to pick between one or the other. You can have both. But, Yochai said that, hey, it's really more of a point of presentation. And I guess I do agree with that. But I do think that maybe if you could say about hex crawls, maybe that the down point about their presentation is that they can be maybe overly, I don't know, confusing or they feel too open, or I don't know. I think the flip side is that I think on point crawls, the presentation can lead you to think that you're basically trapped on the paths, or trapped, or just you're set on the paths. And I would say if you're running a point crawl, or if you're creating a point crawl adventure or something, put some notes in there. Don't rely on the fact that somewhere in Cairn 2E or somewhere in the rules are saying it says, oh, by the way, you can go off the paths. But have something to say like, hey, cross-country travel, see this in Cairn or whatever rule set, or here's a little thing to do it. Just sort of for folks who are reading or like playing, we're not necessarily going to be flipping back and forth. And like I said, it's very easy as a GM or even as players to look at that point map and just think, okay, we got to stay on the lines. Hey, nothing says, even if there are rules for going off the path, you clearly are intended to stay on the path. Let's be real. I think that's usually the emphasis, right? But I think Yochai, I don't want to really paraphrase him too much from the podcast because I don't want to get it wrong. But I think he did acknowledge in some way that that's not just the fault of the readers, but often the people who are creating the point crawls or, aren't doing a good enough job, necessarily doing a good enough job, presenting, doing it in the right way, that is to, while emphasizing to some degree the paths, also being a little bit more of acknowledging the non-path stuff. But yeah. All right, Liminal Hoarders here. They're writing a city sandbox with deep faction gameplay. Do you think hexes or point crawl suits an urban sandbox better? All right, that sounds awesome. I would probably say a point crawl. Because okay, let me think about this. So here's what I'll say. It's really about the level of abstraction you're doing. I think a hex crawl works great if you're doing kind of a zoomed out kind of look. Let me see. I don't know if there's what is Asgar? He has a city generator, right? So if we go, okay. Oh, that's the maps. I want the. Whoops. No, I don't want this. No, I don't want you. I want the city. Oh, it's Wadabu. Sorry. Wrong guy. Okay, so Wadabu. So he has these, right? So here's what I would say. If you are not interested in charting individual streets. So if you're doing streets, that's your point. I mean, it's a lot of points in a big urban settlement, but your points, lines, right? Points. You're not sort of going across like that. If you're running something more abstract, where you're looking at this area, say the docks, and you're not concerned about individual streets, then I think hexes can be useful because the hexes, much like how a hex abstracts terrain and features like that, you could have a hex here. It's like, oh, this is the docks, and this is your hex, and similar to hexes in the wilderness, you can say, okay, this is your chances of getting lost in this neighborhood. These are your odds of running into encounters here. You can kind of have it abstract. If I were running a city map, I would be more likely to do it abstractly because I have not seen, practically speaking, a lot of value in going street by street by street by street. Now, my caveats are that I have not run in a bunch of urban focused settings. I've played plenty of games where we've spent some time in urban settlements, but not as a campaign focus. So it was not important in any games that I've played that we know the city like you would know the city you live in, or a city you visit. That it was more important, the things that were important are like the neighborhood, things like that. Do we know the way, where the neighborhood is, something like that. Basically, like, do we know where the place is and kind of where neighborhood wise it is? Is it sketchy? Is it wealthy? Things like that. In which case you can do that with hex symbology or some other symbology and go there. But if you want to run streets and avenues and have those be things that people know and look at and whatever and chart their course, then I would go with a point crawl. Now, nothing says in a city a hex map might be less necessary because things are often in straight lines and rightish angles. The grid is fine. Yes, though, and a lot of times I think of kind of medieval settlements where they're all scrunched around and kind of crazy. Like most, especially you go to old cities, they're not laid out like New York City and Manhattan where everything's on a grid. It's all kinds of crazy, and the names of the streets often change or are inconsistent if you can find them at all. And they're not following most settlements. Old settlements are not, there are exceptions, some that are, but a lot of them, I would say most of them, are not built on a very organized plan. It's kind of happenstance, kind of organic. So they're not all straight and stuff. But like I said, I like a hex because of that abstraction. And I can say about a hex of the docks that it's rough and tumble, dangerous, lots of, warehouses or whatever. Like I say, oh, we're in the merchants district. Okay, well now in the merchants district, wide streets because wagons things are coming. Maybe we're looking at not storehouses. I'm not sure if we're talking storefronts or whatever, but sort of trading kind of things. So they are more nice and neat and gridded than maybe you get to the luxury part of town, which has bigger estates and fewer streets, but they are very wide. But, there's no alleys and stuff there because walls are abutting each other and they're trying to keep separate. They're trying to keep the riffraff out, so to speak. And that stuff you can write in terms of kind of like an abstract thing. But again, you might want to get into like, at the corner of Grand Street and High Market, whatever, in which case maybe the point crawl makes more sense. Liminal Hoarder says they were thinking of treating hexes as defined districts. Then you could have the factions controlling and spreading influence hex by hex. Yep. Yeah, you could do a lot. Hexes are cool. You can even have both. You can overlay hexes on top of street maps, something else. You got options, but I think hexes could work pretty cool for an urban thing. It just have to, it depends how you see using your urban space. And like I said, I have not played and I haven't even read something like, what's that? I forget the name of that one big city campaign. I've read some of the city state of the city state of the Overlord, whatever the Judges Guild one is, but I haven't read. I'm trying to remember the name of the other one. Isn't the one that Monty Cook made? I'm trying to think. I can't remember the name of it. But some people like the street by street stuff, and I think I'm more in the abstract camp, at least for now. I'm going to reserve the right to change my mind. All right, so there's hex maps and orc. That's great. Does anyone else consciously and erroneously conflate this up with GaryCon attendees? No, I do not. What are some fun encounters I could sprinkle in my hex crawl? Okay, that's fine. Blog roll. I might come. Well, so we got some. Let's see what's in the blog roll. Blogs might be the way to go today. All right. Smash the ability scores. Methods of Madness. Chronicles of Amber. Let's see. Had no clues. Okay, let's see. There's no BBEG. Running complex factions. That might be good. We'll click on that one. Let's see. Initiate me, Captain. Different styles of initiative and gameplay implications. How to crawl. Mechanical manipulation is bad. How player tactics would be unfair if the DM used them. I guess that may be yes and no. All right, so I'm trying to pick some from different ones of these. Let's see. Conquering, 28 days of random tables, one article. Creating a campaign, part 3. I don't want to get into a part 3. D20 rolls where something always happened. Oh, let's see. All right, so we got a couple here. All right, let's hit a couple of these. I don't need this anymore. So we'll go first. This one is at the DDS card Substack. I'll paste this in the chat. And it is called There Is No Big Bad Evil Guy. Kind of like There Is No Spoon, perhaps? I don't know. Oops, did that work? No, what did I do? Oh, yes, it did work. Just something else happened. Okay. Get rid of this marketing. All right. First one's up. By the DDS board, nothing pisses me off more than the single-minded hard-headedness of a self-righteous character. You know the type. They see the world in black and white, making snap judgments about what's right and wrong, and then sprint headfirst into quote-unquote fixing it. They ignore context. They don't question motives. They assume there are no downstream consequences. They never stop to ask what happens next. It drives me nuts. But here's the thing. That's not the player's fault. It's the world's fault. If your setting has a big bad evil guy sitting in a volcano waiting to be stabbed, you're training your players to think like that. If evil is obvious, simple, and centralized, then of course the solution is obvious, simple, and centralized. So stop giving them a big bad evil guy. Give them a world instead. So now, I don't have a problem with this, but I feel like they've already... Maybe this is where my pedantry is coming out. They're clearly, they say, hey, look, you got a guy. I mean, look, I read Big Bad Evil Guy sitting in a volcano waiting to be stabbed. I think Sauron. But the funny thing is about Sauron, Big Bad Evil Guy, I mean, has there been, other than Satan, is there a more, especially to the fantasy genre, right? Sauron is the Big Bad Evil Guy. But note that the answer to destroying Sauron was not the obvious one. Right. So we're already maybe the absolute example of the big bad evil guy is not one that falls into this trap of setting the players straight ahead. But I will acknowledge that in games and a lot of things, it does become about stopping the big bad evil guy. Though I guess maybe another thing that has to be said too is that often the answer, while it might involve eventually stabbing the guy, there's usually a lot of stuff you have to do that isn't just straightforward ahead. You know, you got to find the rod of 7 parts. You got to do the thing. You got to blah, blah, blah. You got to do. You got to pull the sword out of the stone. You got to find the Holy Grail. The stabby part is almost a postscript to what the thing's actually about. But let's read what they got to say. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of funny. Okay, I'm not going to subscribe right now, but thanks. Oh, let's see. I guess I thought this might have been an ad, but I guess it's not. Or is it? What is this? This is Wisdom from Esoteric Ebb. Oh, yeah, I've heard about Esoteric Ebb as a game I need to play. Someone told me about that. I need to check that out. Okay. But it's hard for me to tell exactly what they're saying. So I guess it's about wisdom. Higher wisdom lets you empower your spells, be kind and see the good in all folk. And then you have the egalitarian hope of the Asgalian working class. There are no big bad evil guys. Okay, well, I guess that's the point of that. Personal chaos. Let me show you what I mean. In my current game, the party is adventuring in a land that won its freedom from an empire 300 years ago. That empire subjugated the natives and erased their culture. Now the locals are trying to rebuild after generations of occupation. A city has fallen into ruin during the chaos of reconstruction, and the party is helping to reclaim it. Let me just take a drink here real quick. They discover a cult attempting to resurrect a regional god who was historically evil and decide to shut it down. The party thwarts the cult at every turn. They come up with cool schemes, pull off a few surgical strikes, and eventually they kill the cult leader, track down the god's corpse, and destroy it to prevent physical resurrection. Heroic stuff. Except, early in their investigation, they learned 2 inconvenient details. The Empire is coming back to retake the land. The god's corpse is the source of all clean water in the city. They destroy the god's corpse anyway, which is fine. I run a simulation-style game. My job isn't to shepherd players toward a preferred narrative. They make choices, the world reacts. So now the Empire is invading without opposition, and the lush city they saved is slowly collapsing into a swamp. Okay, there's a city, there's a cult. Okay, so, all right, so that's, I guess, is set up. Rewind the clock. Here's what the players don't know. 1,000 years ago, before the Empire conquered this land, it was overrun with chaotic, malignant gods. Reality warping, abomination spawning, corpse animating nonsense. The Empire purged that worship brutally, oppressively, wholesale slaughter. That cultural destruction the natives resent, it included the eradication of those chaotic gods. Now that Imperial control is gone, chaotic worship is creeping back. A few regions are already getting, I don't know what that is, into business, I guess, with abominations crawling out of the earth and the dead rising more often than they should. The Empire isn't returning just to dominate, it's returning to contain. Classic law versus chaos. So what have we wrought? Let's look at the board. Evil cult wants independence from genocidal empire. Genocidal empire wants to stop reality from dissolving into a chaos swamp. Natives want cultural survival. The party wants to do the right thing. Imperfect factions, imperfect information, imperfect decisions. And now we have a world sliding towards catastrophe because a group of fifth-level adventurers solve the problem directly in front of them. That's not bad design, that's depth. I mean, yes. I'm trying to see, okay, I want to get to the point here. So let's see. Okay, so now here we go. The real issue, tunnel vision. The hard-headed justice warrior isn't the problem. The problem is a static world that rewards tunnel vision. If charging forward is always correct, players will charge forward. But if the world moves independently, if factions pursue goals, succeed, fail, escalate, then decisions acquire weight. I mean, this is true, but this has nothing. I think that the problem I guess I'm having here is this is not, and none of this has to do with whether you're using a big bad evil guy or factions. And in fact, no one just has one. No, I don't know any games that have a big bad evil guy and no factions. Even looking at something like Lord of the Rings, there are factions. Even though we can look and say, well, there are just really two sides, right? There's the free peoples, and then there's the forces of evil. And if we look at it at that level, you go, yeah, there's kind of one. If you're not on the Sauron's, we're not playing the game of being Sauron's lackey, so there's essentially one faction. Sure, but within that, what did you have? Well, you had Saruman, who they thought was good, turned out to be bad. There's Rohan, that because of Sauron was sort of struggling to be good. There's the elves, who can provide only limited things at the moment. There's the wise, that can provide things on sort of another kind of limited basis. There's the hobbits. There's the Ents. There's, I think I mentioned Gondor, right? There's Tom Bombadil as sort of a faction of one. There's the dwarves and kind of whatever the dwarves are doing. There's the Balrog, who basically is its own faction. So there's actually a fair amount of stuff. There's the Eagles, who are also kind of their own faction. So I guess I like what they're saying here. Is my camera? I feel like my camera's about to turn itself off, like it's wont to do sometimes. I like what I like what the person's saying here. However, I don't know that they're proving the point of big bad evil guy is bad, because they've created, I guess, this false dichotomy of it's either factions or big bad evil guy, and you shall never have both. But that's not true, and I don't know when that's ever been true. I mean, I'm sure there's been some campaign where there are no factions, and it is very black and white and kind of dull like that, but I think it's a bit of a straw man that they've set up to joust against. But you let me know what you think. Okay, so the real issue, right, tunnel vision. Time becomes a resource. Ignore one fire too long and the whole forest burns. This sounds like too much work. It's not. You don't need a 400-page lore Bible. The lore isn't concrete until the players learn it. You can backport motivations and causes as needed. What you do need are factions with goals, consequences, timelines, and momentum. Think in weeks or months. Ask what else could be happening right now. Keep those answers in your back pocket. Nothing says this guy just has a good opinion on how RPGs should be run and wanted to write about it. He's not really addressing the thing he claimed as a thesis. Yes, I would agree, because I think these are good things, and I think he's making good. Right, he's saying absolutely. I think good techniques and good things, but yeah, he's presented it in terms of this concept that doesn't really match. Codifying it, here's a simple framework. What does the faction want? What happens if they succeed? What steps are required? How long does each step take? How difficult is each step? Then roll for it every week or month. Faction attempts to make progress. I mean, this is basically your what do you call it? Fronts. There's lots of things that Mouse Ritter has a very compact, but people love how they do for their factions. I mean, there's lots of stuff out there, right? And then we have some success stuff, and then we have an example, which I'm not going to read. But here you go. See, in the end, he comes back to, there's no big bad evil guy. Stop building a Dark Lord in a tower. There's nothing wrong with the Dark Lord in the tower. And there's lots of fun you can have with factions. Like, again, going back to Sauron and saying on a very zoomed out level, there's two factions, good and evil, fair. However, there's lots of stuff underneath there that you could play around with. The Easterlings, the Southrons, the Raiders of Umbar, the different orcs. I mean, even in the Two Towers, when the Sauron's orcs versus Saruman's orcs are fighting. They're orcs from the Gundabad Mountains versus Mordor orcs and whatever different ideas they might have. And the Nazgul are kind of on their own, doing their own thing, have their own orders, maybe their own thing. There's lots of stuff you can have in here. And I think the argument should not be about big bad evil guy or factions. But that being said, this is a good piece. I agree with Nothing's assessment. Good advice, good stuff, just maybe wrapped in a frame that doesn't really speak to what they're trying to say. Now, this blog is called Cat Girl Foreskin Games. That's quite a title. I will post the link. And this one's called, let's see, D20 Rolls Where Something Always Happens. There we go. Okay. Hey, Croco. All right. So this was posted by Catgirl, quote unquote, B Foreskin. That's a name. My least favorite part of dice-based games, whether playing or facilitating, is a roll that results in nothing. The prevailing advice to only roll when it's important or to always fail forward helps, but I frequently see difficulty in implementing such and complaints that these suggestions are too unspecific. Barring a complete break from the OSRD and D20 framework, like ditching attack rolls altogether in Into the Odd and its descendants, the most common mechanical answer for this is the opposed roll where usually one side always succeeds. Using your action to parry in Dragonbane and rolling to beat an incoming attack feels more involved than an attack simply missing against your AC. Forbidden Psalm achieves similar with having both sides roll attacks in a clash. Typically, someone comes out hurt. However, these all still have the potential for nothing happens results, and opposed rolls require two rolls, slowing down play. I propose an alternate model that captures the same spirit. So I guess I'm always mixed on this, because I'm and this is another something I wanted to maybe do a video about, but I haven't gotten around to. I think I like to think of RPGs like sports. And I don't mean the combat as sport versus combat as war thing. I mean as a sport. And a sport has difficulty. And a sport has, I don't know any sport that doesn't have a kind of does not have null results. And I think as a player of a sport, you want to put yourself in the best case, right, to not get a null result. But you also have to live with the fact that you are going to get these nulls, and those add up to, as someone who watches the sport or as you're participating, part of the tensions of a sporting event come from watching teams or individuals struggle against each other, overcoming those null results, trying to avoid them, and who can build up and get there. And when both sides are achieving nothing, you kind of feel this buildup of, because who's going to break it down? A defensive football game, someone needs to score, but who's going to get that breakthrough and score when they're both just kind of punting back and forth at each other? Or a soccer game that's in a stalemate where the ball's kind of moving around the midfield, but nobody's able to get that break. And then, suddenly someone is going to break one. And so I tend to look at those nothing happens. People take them I don't want to say out of context necessarily, but I think they look at them on their own and say, oh yeah, this particular turn, nothing happens. But if you have some turns where nothing's happening, man, you see that tension rising to when something does happen, it feels more impactful because you've been waiting on it. Now, of course, there is a downside to it, particularly in games where each turn takes a long time. And so there's a balancing point of this tension that's coming, but there's also these, it's like these ups and downs, right? And I think in a lot of the modern games where the turns tend to take longer, more and more that tension is lost in just the boredom. If I have to wait an hour between turns, especially if I'm not engaged with what other players are doing because they're taking a long time, then I'm just kind of fall away from the action, and so that tension's lost on me. It just sort of dissipates. Whereas I think in a lot, especially old school OSR type games where your turns are really short and punchy, the fact that you may have a couple turns and you're not hitting, it's like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh, we got it. Or, oh no, they finally broke through and got us. We've been holding this back. Like, hey, we can beat this dragon. And the dragon's not hitting, and the dragon's not hitting, and we're whittling it down, but then, oh, the dragon hit. And it's like, oh, we needed one more round and we didn't get it, kind of thing. All right. That's my spiel. Not particularly well developed, I'll say. But I find that the people who want to eliminate the nothing happens, I think, are focused on that specific turn. But I do think they miss a little bit of the ebbs and flows of the overall game. That being said, like, if you can get rid of it in a way, and I don't have anything against Into the Odd way of doing it. I haven't played enough Into the Odd to really come up with whether I love it or not. But it's all good. But I just feel like it's, especially now with like Draw Steel kind of popularizing it in a broader market, this idea of kind of getting rid of all the null results. I feel like it's a bit misplaced to me. All right. So, okay, now let's get to their alternate model. One of the main drives behind developing my wargame Riflemaid was speeding up play. That's a great name, by the way, Riflemaid. Was speeding up play by ensuring a roll always results in something interesting. However, in Riflemaid, I opted to use playing cards, with each side choosing a suit color, red or black, and on an attack, a card is drawn, with that color side winning. On a face card, a strong success where she kills her opponent. On a numeric card, a weak success where she instead suppresses. Aces are wild cards where both sides kill each other. I think that's pretty clever. In adapting this for dice-based play, I opted to have 1 and 20 for aces, 2 to 4, and 17 to 19 as strong successes, 5 to 10, and 11 to 16 for weak successes, with 2 to 10 for the GM and 11 to 19 for the party. All right, so, okay. So I guess the players rolling the die, if they roll between 2 and 10, the GM side gets the weak success. If they roll over 10, up to 19, they get the weak success, I think is what that means. Riflemaid uses advantage, disadvantage in place of modifiers, but traditional static modifiers would work as well. First adding the attacking side's attack bonus, then subtracting the defending side's AC bonus, in addition to anything circumstantial. If using static modifiers, I would instead make aces 10 to 11, so that you can't over-succeed or do away with them entirely. The system most obviously applies for combat, but can be used universally. Failure when making an out-of-combat check alerts a nearby enemy, gives NPC some leverage over the PCs, results in a roll on an encounter table, or some other direct negative event. If there aren't others around who could exploit the PC's failure, it most likely isn't worth rolling for in the first place, as they could do that task unimpeded. This is fine, but this to me seems to be the same thing as using the kind of fail forward sort of stuff that she said earlier on in the piece was too unspecific, because that's basically if like your mixed success kind of deal on all these systems is usually some flavor of alerting an enemy, getting put in a disadvantageous or disadvantageous, I don't know, in a bad spot, et cetera, et cetera. So if it's okay for this, I don't know. I thought that was part of what she was trying to overcome, is the fact that those are unspecific. This does introduce the wrinkle of there being degrees of success and what strong versus weak looks like. Lots of options for this exist. I'm partial towards Knave second editions, giving a free non-damaging maneuver on a result of 21 plus, but the standard of double damage or an extra attack die for strong successes works fine. Additionally, this method was developed for a game where everyone has ranged weapons. If one side can't shoot back, that can lead to a nothing happens result. I like giving a free move to the defending side unable to retaliate as her success. The action economy shifts, favoring smaller, stronger forces, but generous use of modifiers. Okay, so essentially, right, there's some ways to do it. I think this is fine. I don't disagree, but I think they just ended up kind of back at the beginning, because you're still left with unspecific, I guess, implementations. So it's just a deep. And to me, it's like, okay, we've come around to doing this with a D20, and we still have these kind of potentially difficult to implement vague things like put them at a disadvantageous. Is that even a word, disadvantageous? I feel like it should be, right? The opposite of advantageous, but I don't know. It doesn't sound right to me for some reason. Put the PCs up against it a bit, raise the odds against them, sort of thing. So it's cool, but I don't know if this is another one where I don't know if it quite proves what they were set out to prove, but interesting ideas. I like the playing card thing. That I thought was pretty cool. Okay, so there was some of the blog roll. How are we on time? All right, we got about 10-ish minutes. Let's see. Muscle Tower and OSR boss rush. That's pretty cool. Finally, a question. Is the DM supposed to err on the side of letting players' plans succeed? Ooh, this should be a good one. All right, let's open this up here. This is posted by Cute Marzipan 3956. Is the DM supposed to err on the side of letting players' plans succeed? I'm trying to figure out how running OSR games work. If players come up with a plausible plan, am I supposed to lean towards making this plan succeed as long as it's plausible? Or is it better to just run events as close to what I think really should happen? Well, Cute Marzipan 3956, you're supposed to roll dice. That's what I look at it. You're not supposed to say it succeeds, and you're not supposed to just say what I think should happen. What you should do is think about, and I can only give you guidelines. Anybody can only give you guidelines. You got to kind of figure out the details yourself. How implausible is this plan? And that becomes the modifiers to the rolls. I like what BX does in the back of one of the books. They mention, well, let me see. Hold on. I happen to have my, where is it? I can show a page. I happen to have my BX folder right here. So I want to say, is it in the back of the basic book? Well, let's see. It's somewhere. There's some advice stuff, which I think is pretty on point for this. Okay, let's see. This is the index. Got a glossary. Here we go. Let me see what we have here. Okay. Here we go. There's always a chance. The DM may want to base a character's chance of doing something on his or her ability scores, strength, dex, and so forth, to perform a difficult task, such as climbing up a rope or thinking of a forgotten clue. The player should roll the ability score less on a d20. The DM may give a bonus or penalty to the roll, depending on the difficulty of the action. A roll of 1 should always succeed, and a roll of 20 should always fail. So that's just one way you can do it, right? There's the other one that's actually not the one I was thinking of, though. Here we go. So that's fine. So that's just there's your basic thing, right? If you may want to base their chance of doing something on their ability scores, because that kind of shows their internal knowledge. But I think for something like really what this GM's talking about, the complex sort of a complex plan. Okay, well, I guess I would say before I read this advice, one, try to break it down into the parts. You break it down into as granular parts as you care to. So if someone's like, I want to make a rope bridge across the Grand Canyon, well, there's a lot of steps you have to do before you can get to putting the rope bridge across the Grand Canyon. And you can say, well, you're going to need a heck of a lot of rope, and you're going to need to, do you even know how wide the Grand Canyon is, and how are you going to get the rope bridge to both sides? Like, there's so many things, and you can break it down into all these pieces, and that will help. I think it's actually a good exercise just to go through, because you may find that there's a natural obstacle. For example, the party looks at each other and says, well, I got 50 feet of rope, and someone's like, I also got 50 feet of rope, and you go, that's it? You're going to need, hundreds of thousands of feet of rope. So now the problem is, well, okay, now we got to get rope. It could be a whole adventure about that. Is let's get all the stuff we need to do that. And then, of course, the next thing is, well, now you got to measure the Grand Canyon. How are you going to do that? And how are you going to get one end of the rope to one side of the canyon and keeping one end on the other side of the canyon? All kinds of great things. All those problems, the ones that they can't just solve, that could become adventures. Or if it's just you can't do it, hey, you want to build an atomic bomb? Great. Where are you going to get the depleted uranium, and how do you even know what that is? Then, okay. And then you can then the plan is kind of dead. If you kind of get through there and the plan can succeed, then you can look at each part And you can either roll dice or kind of throw odds together for those parts so they can make incremental successes. Maybe it's a long-term project, et cetera, or you can boil it down into a single number. Wiki Snapper says roll the odds. Croco says evaluate probability, roll a D100. The further away from the target, the more complications. That's a good way to do it. So the one about that, actually, the rolling a D100, is the one I was ultimately looking for, which said, here it is. That's not in the rules. Players will often surprise the DM by doing the unexpected. Don't panic. When this happens, the DM should just make sure that everything is done in the order given by the outline or sequence of events. I just need a drink here. Let's see. Is done in the order given by the outline or sequence of events being used. Minor details may be made up as needed to keep the game moving. All DMs learn how to handle both new ideas and unusual actions quickly and with imagination. Quite often, a DM can decide on a solution to a player's actions not covered by these rules. Other times, a problem may have no simple solution. One quick way for a DM to decide whether a solution will work is by imagining the situation and then choosing percentage chances for different possibilities. For example, suppose the GM is running a combat that is taking place on a ledge next to an unexplored chasm. One player suddenly decides that his character has no chance to survive combat. The player announces, "My character wants to jump into the chasm to escape." There may be a chance that he will fall to a nearby ledge or land in a pool of water at the bottom of the chasm. The DM thinks about the dungeon for a minute and remembers that an underground river flows through some of the lower dungeon levels, so there might be a pool below. Even so, the character will fall 60 feet, and a normal fall will do 1d6 points of damage per 10 feet fallen. This character only has 7 hit points. It seems likely to die, even if the water cushions his landing and reduces the damage. However, there should always be a chance to do something nearly impossible. A player should have, at the very least, a saving throw or a stated percentage chance of a miraculous occurrence saving the character. The DM answers, quote, "Looking down into the chasm, your character can estimate that he has a 98% chance of dying. No saving throw. If he jumps, if you decide your character jumps, roll percentage dice. A result of 19, 99, or 100 will mean that your character lives, but any other result will mean that he will die in the attempt. Do you still want to jump?" So there you go. I mean, I think that's really good, right? Give him a chance. So I think worst case scenario, you can give them a 1 in 100 chance, which they may jump at depending on how desperate they are. Otherwise, they may start to revise their plan. But that's, you don't have to really do more than that. The tone of your game will dictate how crazy or off the wall a plan can be. If you're playing in just a real, beer and pretzels gonzo thing, then, you may let your characters go wild and do all kinds of crazy stuff and always give them like, hey, I'm always going to give you a 20% chance or something like that, right? Oh, okay, yeah, 1 in 20, 5% chance, 1 in 20 chance. Great. Or you may be running something serious where you are going to just say no to a bunch of plans. And if they push and push and push, maybe say, all right, you got a 1 in 100. There's a 1 in 100 chance. Right? You could probably even make it harder, but I wouldn't. 1 in 100, if they make it, that's the story for the ages. So you might as well just let them have it. So I think just follow that and have fun, right? It's a game. You want people to try things. You don't want it to be so tamped down that, they don't feel like they can do anything. But obviously you have a campaign that has a certain vibe to it. Is it gritty? Is it gonzo? Is it heroic? What is that? And just let that be your guide. But I would err on the opportunity, not erring on just like, hey, it works, but just the opportunity to work. And that's where the players should be pooling their resources and getting all the modifiers and things that they can from interacting with the world to get their plan as close to success as they can. Kako says there's always a chance for a puddle of water at the bottom of a chasm. Maybe. Yeah. But you got a 2% chance of finding it. All right. So I'm just curious of a couple of the comments and then we'll probably call this a stream. So let's see. Onslaughtitude says, even in OSR games, you are the window into the world. The players only have you as the source of information. If they have a plan, and it'll be obvious the plan would fail to their characters because the characters have more knowledge of the world than the players do, then yes, you should let them know. Do you think the plan would work? Then it works. Do you think the plan would not work? Then they should probably know that ahead of time. And okay, that's fine. I mean, like I said, I don't know if I just don't. I guess people are like, it works or it doesn't work. Where I think this is where we're rolling dice. I mean, if it's obvious the thing's going to work, it's an open door or it's a door that's not locked, so we're going to pull the handle and open it. It's like, okay, I don't need to
Is that your plan? Yes, great. Okay, don't need to. But for anything significant, I would want to roll some. I want to roll dice. That's what that's the whole thing about being a game. Philadelphia Rollins replies, and if the plan would come down to some chance or skill, you can let them know that, and the dice can start rolling. Yes, absolutely. I do think you should cover the plans with the party before you start rolling dice and deciding. Talk them through it. Talk them through the steps. Oftentimes, if it's super goofy, sometimes as a player, you're thinking it through and it seems really makes sense. And then you hear it read back to you and you think like, oh yeah, that's a horrible idea. So just read it back. I mean, it's always a good thing, right? You hear something, read it back. Tell me what I just said. I told you a plan. Yeah, you read it back to me. And oftentimes, one, it's good just for showing that you're paying attention. And two, you often will highlight deficiencies. I remember one time my players were, the players were they came up with something and as they're laying it out, it sounded fine. And I read it back to them and said, okay, so you're balancing this on top of that. And then you're going to step on it and do something. And they're like, oh, and they're like, oh, yeah, that sounds like a terrible idea. I was like, yeah, it does. And they came up with something else. Let's see. So Trogrotfist, is that that? I don't have did I get that correctly? I did. Trogrotfist said that they had a GM in a sci-fi game once who was terrible at this. My infiltration specialist droid worked his way onto a ship, hacked into its systems to find the reactor, made his way to the reactor and planted a bunch of bombs, and then got out of there. Later, when we needed a distraction, I set the bombs off, only to be told nothing happened. Turns out that ship had 4 reactors, something I didn't know, but my character who hacked the system 100% would have known. Anyway, that game didn't last long because that was his MO, not a one-off incident. Yeah, it seems like a case of the GM saying, I don't want my ship to be bombed, so there are four reactors. Though, that stuff does happen. I guess on the flip side is that you can see in history things where that's happened, where someone's gone and to do something thinking and there was like, no, but there was actually a secondary pit over there they didn't know. In the case of hacking, this is where I'd be rolling dice. How are you hacking? Or do you think your character may have thought they knew, but they didn't know? Because plans have been changed and they didn't know. Well, they don't know what they don't know, kind of thing. Let's see. Is there anything else in this? All right, so I'll just read this last one. Scow Chemisto says, I agree with this take. I would only add 2 points of emphasis. I'll double down on the to their characters bit. I have no qualm with players creating all kinds of plans destined to failure if those plans don't contradict information their characters have available. That's even if the players have no reasonable way to get the needed information. E.g., I don't consider this a player failure, it's just part of the game. Players are always making gambles on insufficient information. Every open door in the dungeon is such a gamble, right? A player of mine said something I think they were paraphrasing from a podcast they had listened to. Every OSR campaign needs at least one player willing to pull the lever. This is true. On the other hand, I will pause players if they are indulging in a lot of speculative planning based on unknown information, e.g. a lot of, if X, then we could do M, but if Y, then we could do N, but if Z, then we could do O discussions. I'll do this because I think players often don't realize they are doing it. It could soak up a lot of game time, and in my experience, players usually consider that time wasted in hindsight. I'll step in and say, hey, you all have 10 minutes talking about this. Maybe you should consider figuring out a way to get more information first. I want the players to make their own decisions, but I also want them to look back at the session and say, that was fun. And not, man, we spent an hour talking about this stuff and ended up not mattering at all. I don't mind that so much. I mean, I as a player will sometimes be like, all right, we don't know or whatever, we're spinning our wheels. I don't necessarily feel like that's the GM's job to do, but hey, I don't think it's a terrible thing. I don't think it's terrible either. It's probably a good thing, but that's the nature. OSR folks spending, an hour outside a door that's got nothing behind it, trying to figure out whether to try to slip it open or break it open or listen, and just taking lots of time, and ultimately there's nothing there, kind of thing. It happens. It's an aspect of play, but I think you can definitely, as a player, try to get better at that. And yeah, your GM, if you're so inclined, can help, but I don't necessarily feel that's necessary. Whew. All right, folks. Well, this is a Friday stream. I'm hoping I'll get this zine thing ready through the weekend, so look for that. If you missed me talking about that, just rewind at the beginning of the stream where I go through the doc in very brief fashion, but it's there. Other than that, folks, have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Game on, everybody, and I'll talk to you later. Bye now.